Not pretty. Not good. I am constantly confounded at the Kansas City Chiefs' inability to simply lose a football game. It has to be catastrophic. It has to be embarrassing. That's true. It has to be a loss that makes you question whether or not the Kansas City Chiefs are capable of ever winning a football game again. They will. This is devastating, not where anyone wants to be tonight, not the video I was hoping to make tonight. This is when you one of the worst Super Bowl losses of history, right? The Kansas City Chiefs in this run have 3 titles and 2 of the most embarrassing Super Bowl performances possibly that we've ever seen. But they've been in 5 Super Bowls. Look, we watched 20 Kansas City Chiefs contests this year. Just think back to when you were hoping for a single playoff victory, a single one. The Montana victory was slightly before my football fandom. I came to football late. I was born in 1985. I remember that season a little bit, but as far as what the playoffs meant, I was still kind of not real cogent of what football meant. So for the large portion of my adult life, the Kansas City Chiefs were incapable in the playoffs. It was the Kansas City curse. You remember it. You were here. That's over. But the bigger the light, the more devastating the loss. This is the final chapter of this season. It's not the final chapter of Patrick Mahomes' career. This is not the last playoff game that we will talk about. This game, as devastating as it was, as embarrassing as it was, as catastrophic to the sort of hopes towards a greater dynasty as it was, is over. This game is over. This season is over. Next season starts anew, and this game, as terrible as it was not without a bright spot. That bright spot obviously being the lone bright spot in this game, Xavier Worthy. This game was the game that we were waiting for from Xavier Worthy. Unfortunately, this game was also the game that we have been afraid the Kansas City Chiefs would play this entire season long. All year, we were afraid that the line would look the way the line had looked tonight. All season, we were afraid that the team would absolutely collapse. It did. They did. It just happened in the last game of the season. The Eagles are truly Super Bowl worthy. That should not be overlooked. The Eagles are this season it's easy to overlook the Eagles in the NFC this year because of the season that the Lions had, because of the season that the Vikings had. The Eagles, were it not for those 2 teams and the storylines that surrounded them, the Eagles would have been the prohibitive favorites coming into the playoffs to win the Super Bowl. Not to go to the Super Bowl for the NFC, but to win the Super Bowl. We have to remember that as well. Back to Xavier Worthy, because I want to talk about something good. We finally saw Patrick Mahomes uncork one downfield for Xavier Worthy. That is not the last time we will see that. This is a building block for next season. Next season, I believe, will begin the Red Vengeance Tour. We have seen Patrick Mahomes embarrassed in the past, and he does not take that lightly. And this was an embarrassing loss for Patrick Mahomes. This was an embarrassing loss for that entire Kansas City Chiefs team. I think you saw it on the sidelines. They were well aware of the way that this game was going, right? You don't know how many of those players, how many of those coaches we have seen for the last time. There has always been speculation around Andy Reid. I don't think that this is going to be the last game the Kansas City Chiefs get out of Andy Reid, though I know everyone during that game was probably hoping, right? At some point, there's no shame in that. but there is shame if you are, I think, still hoping for it. Andy Reid has delivered during his tenure in Kansas City. He has delivered 3 Super Bowl wins, 5 Super Bowl appearances. And yeah, did he call the game that probably needed to be called early? No, I frankly don't understand why Isaiah Pacheco was on the field to start the game. I don't know why the Kansas City Chiefs were down 3 possessions before their 3rd rushing attempt. I don't know why. I can't explain a lot of things in this game. I just can't. I have my limits as a commentator. Back to Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy's good. Xavier Worthy was taking that loss seemingly harder than almost anyone on the field. You saw him score and not care. You saw him get a big play, and it didn't really register for him. He understood. He seems to not at all be a prima donna wide receiver. Next year, the Kansas City Chiefs will return Xavier Worthy, will return Rashee Rice. This is not the way DeAndre Hopkins hoped to appear in his first Super Bowl, and you have to believe that he might be wanting to come back. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. There's not a whole lot of good things here. This video I will take as the kickoff to the off season. Brett Veach does not know what a slow rebuild is, so I believe that he will be very aggressive. It's easy after a game like this to curse and scream and say, why don't the Kansas City Chiefs have any offensive linemen? You're not going to get offensive linemen drafting at 32nd overall. This year they'll be drafting 31st overall. So if there is an offensive tackle to be had, which Andy Reid does not like to start young offensive tackles, so whether or not that happens, whether or not Brett Veach gets aggressive and moves up in the draft in order to claim one of those names, we don't know yet. But I believe that this offseason will be spent in the trenches, both offensive and defensive. You have to imagine that we have seen the last of Steve Spagnuolo in the red and gold. He's probably going to get a head coaching job somewhere. Even if the Eagles did put up 40 points in the Super Bowl, that does not take away the entire season, the entire career that Spagnuolo has had in Kansas City. A great tenure in Kansas City. He will get another head coaching opportunity, I believe, this offseason. So the Kansas City Chiefs are likely to have to replace a defensive coordinator. There will be some rebuilding on both sides of the ball. I think Trey Smith is probably gone. Mike Caliendo is hopefully not starting next year. The offensive line collapse is something that had been partially there all season. Tonight, it seemed that Mahomes let it rattle him. It seems that Mahomes went back to gunslinger ways, which sometimes, 80% of the time, is to the Kansas City Chiefs' benefit. Was not tonight. 2 turnovers. One, obviously, he was getting hit by Joe Thuney, who was being bullied back into the quarterback. That's a rough play. You can't make it that easy for the defense. You can't make it that easy for a linebacker to catch the football. At a loss for words, honestly, with the game that was played. The offseason will be, like I said, I think spent largely in the trenches on both sides of the ball. You saw on the offensive side just what that bad game looks like. Trey Smith, like I said. So Trey Smith and Nick Bolton, I think, are comparable. They are hard-nosed football players that have athletic limitations. And those athletic limitations, when they are exploited, lead to devastating outcomes. A middle linebacker who cannot stay in coverage, an offensive guard who is incredible in run blocking, struggles in pass blocking. Both of those players are free agents. I expect both of them to walk. the Kansas City Chiefs will have to replace 2 offensive guards. One might simply be pushing Joe Thuney back into guard should Joe Thuney choose not to retire. The left tackle situation for the Kansas City Chiefs heading into next season, one of the strategies that we've seen Brett Veach employ time and again is pairing a young player with a nickel and dime free agent. Those nickel and dime free agents may not be incredible players because you're getting them at a discount, you're getting them at a bargain. But when you're pairing them with a younger player, the way the Kansas City Chiefs have, oftentimes you get at least serviceable play. The issue so I think Jawan Taylor might be gone too. I don't know how that happens. I don't know if they are able to move on from him via cutting him, if they can trade him. Here's the thing. You can't overreact to a game like this because simply getting rid of a problem opens up that problem full time. Jawan Taylor, not a terrible offensive tackle. 80% of the time. That 20% of the time, absolutely devastating. Can you guarantee anyone else on the roster, anyone else through free agency, anyone else through the draft is going to be better that 20% of the time than Jawan Taylor? Because you could get rid of Jawan Taylor and find yourself with a player who's fantastic 75% of the time. Right? The one thing, I'm not a baseball fan. One thing that when I tried to be a baseball fan, I learned from baseball is that there are so many plays in a season. In baseball, you have starting pitchers, you have relievers, you have middle relievers, you have the one inning guy, you have the guy that can come in, and I'm talking about pitchers. I don't know if I introduced that idea very well, but that doesn't happen in football. But it does to an extent. It does in the way that these players have to prepare. These players, especially in a 17-game season, and I know it's just one extra game, it's a long year when you are playing a sport as physical as NFL football. The big question, so one thing that I asked a couple years ago with the extension to 17 games, and I think we're going to see a move to 18 games is it's just too profitable for them not to do. I think that the playoffs suffer for it because you lose too many players, and all of a sudden teams like the Detroit Lions are unable to really nail things down, and they take an early postseason exit. Is that will we see teams start to employ longer season strategies? Rotation on the offensive line. Maybe you give your backup quarterback a series here and there. You have to have 4 running backs, right? All of these types of things. The Kansas City Chiefs have been in that reality for seasons now. Over half a decade now in that very long season territory. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, the Kansas City Chiefs were not supposed to be in this position. No team has ever been in position to win 3 consecutive Super Bowls. The Kansas City Chiefs could not pull it off. No team has ever pulled it off. The struggles that we see from this team tonight might be indicative of the fact that we will never see a team three-peat because of that salary cap. Something you don't have to worry about in a sport like basketball, but the luxury tax. I don't even really know what that is, but I know that you can go over the salary cap in basketball. You can't in football. You pay hefty prices for being over the salary cap in football. That leads to roster deterioration. And I started this channel way back when talking about the idea of roster rot. The fact that you are drafting so late, it really toys with your ability to find impact players through the draft. That was when they were just making the playoffs season after season. Now they've been to the Super Bowl 3 consecutive seasons. They've been to the AFC Championship game 7 consecutive seasons. They've been in the playoffs so many times for so many consecutive years that it becomes difficult to build that roster, not just at the top. What I think part of what you're seeing with the offensive line right now, the same way we saw it with the offensive line seasons ago, that was my main talking point. 2019, 2020. It's not about the starters all the time. The Chiefs lost, or the Chiefs could not develop a left tackle. Didn't have a guy who could do it. Okay, well, you can move Joe Thuney out there. Now you've got your backup offensive guard on the field. That backup offensive guard, Mike Caliendo, was an undrafted rookie free agent. Already, at the number 2 spot on the line, you have a guy who was undrafted. Now, he performed admirably for a guy that was not drafted for all the season long. All the live-long season. He got on the field, I think, for something like 30 snaps last year. Didn't really get a chance to see him. I think. It's the top of my head. But this season, in the Super Bowl, he looked like an undrafted player. What more can you ask of him? The Kansas City Chiefs don't get 20 draft picks every year. The Kansas City Chiefs don't draft in the top 30 picks of the NFL draft most seasons. This year, they're going to have to do something. They're going to have to wheel and deal. They're going to have to make moves. They're going to have to shake and shimmy. But with that comes the reality, the stark reality, that backup positions will falter. You want to trade your first-round pick and XYZ in order to get up into the top 20 to pick an offensive tackle that you think can start for your football team? Guess what? You're trading away assets that could have been used to draft an offensive guard in the 4th round. Oftentimes, you can find a starter at offensive guard in the 4th round. Now you don't have your starting guard because you had to get an offensive tackle. We can blame Brett Veach, or we can celebrate Brett Veach and Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones. We can celebrate Mike Caliendo because they have made it to 3 consecutive Super Bowls. This is a disheartening loss. It is not something that stops the dynasty. It is not something that resets the franchise. It is something that we're going to have to explain all offseason. Look, this is what happened. Look, there was X, Y, and Z, right? But it's not the worst thing in the world. The Kansas City Chiefs, it's not the worst thing in the sports world. It's not the worst thing in Kansas City Chiefs history. They were in the Super Bowl. Teleport yourself back 6 years. What would you have given to see the Kansas City Chiefs with that Super Bowl logo on their jerseys? Life goes on, and so does football. I will have tons of content for the offseason. Mock drafts galore, player positional rundowns for the draft, all sorts of things. So this will be a hub for the draft. Last season was the first time I really took a foray into the prospective free agent territory, and I will be back there looking at those prospective signings. I will cover every signing the Kansas City Chiefs make, every move the Kansas City Chiefs make. I will be doing rookie recaps for all of the rookies on the roster, many of whom did not play, all of whom had so many weeks of practice. I haven't even counted them. I mean, you got 3 preseason games, you got 17 regular season games, and then they went all the way to the Super Bowl yet again. Those players will be better heading into next season. You have to hope that Hunter Nourzad, for example, can be the offensive guard next year. You have to hope, for example, Wanye Morris will be able to man the right tackle position. Kingsley Suamataia perhaps at the right tackle position. Maybe one of them moves into guard. Maybe you keep Joe Thuney at left tackle. I don't see that happening. You saw the Eagles have an elite defensive line. You saw the limitations of Joe Thuney at left tackle against an elite defensive line. It seemed that there was a lot of miscommunication along the offensive line. I can't say that for sure. Again, this is viewing the game live, haven't gone back over any of the film yet, so I'm not sure how much there is to take from the film of this game. I think there will be some things. There is, like I said, that bright side of Xavier Worthy having finally the Xavier Worthy game. I have no idea what his stat line actually was from the game. Let me check real quick. Something massive for sure. Xavier Worthy, 8 receptions, 157 yards, 19.6 yard average, and 2 touchdowns. That is the Xavier Worthy that will carry into next season. I think I don't know about Juju being back. Juju has been a staple for this team. You have to wonder about Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown, even after his return, did not exactly pop off. So perhaps he is still in the quote-unquote bargain bin. Defensively, you had George Karlaftis with a sack. You had Drew Tranquill with a sack. You had Brian Cook with that interception early that looked like it was going to keep the Chiefs in the game. It did not. Nico Remigio, another bright spot. Not necessarily a whole lot of production in this game, but you found a guy that is feisty. You found a guy that is able to really make the special teams count for something in the return game, something the Kansas City Chiefs have not had for a couple seasons now. Difficult to see, especially I'm not the biggest Jalen Hurts fan. I'm not a real big. So the evolution of a football is one that is trending towards mobile quarterbacks, is one that is trending towards hard-nosed quarterbacks. You see the runs that Jalen Hurts puts out. You see the runs that Josh Allen puts out. These are guys that have had postseason success. I don't know about the type of running that Lamar Jackson does. He seems to be limited the minute the playoffs start. So what that means for defensive line construction is probably the bigger, kind of faster guys continuing to make their impact. We've seen movements in the draft lately where some of these edge players are perhaps undersized but run 4.40s. Not making the greatest impacts during the season, at least that I can tell. Maybe I'm missing a few players, but a few players is the exception. Again, not the rule. So I imagine that should the defensive line go under reconstruction, whether Steve Spagnuolo is the Kansas City Chiefs defensive coordinator or not, it will continue with these Steve Spagnuolo type defensive linemen. The defensive tackle position is one that is a question mark for the Kansas City Chiefs. That second guy to pair next to Chris Jones. I think we are... So you hesitate, I believe, to project an incredible rebuild, base level rebuild for a team that has been to 3 consecutive Super Bowls, for a team that has been to 7 consecutive AFC Championship games and have won the AFC West for approximately 37 consecutive seasons. The AFC West is getting harder. Say what you want about Pete Carroll, he can coach. Say what you want about the Chargers. They did look better this season than they have in the past. Say what you want about the Broncos. I think that is going to be the prime contender moving forward for the Chiefs, not the Chargers. So you hesitate to really project a grand scale rebuild. I don't think Brett Veach does anything in half measures. Anything that he has the power to do, he does full bore and then a couple extra. So I think we are likely to see perhaps more moves this offseason than we would project, than we would think, than might be quote-unquote sensible. But the key cog there is Patrick Mahomes. We have seen that. We have seen Patrick Mahomes be successful with different iterations of this team, with profoundly different iterations of the Kansas City Chiefs. And so I think they will bank on the fact that so long as they have that piece out there, moving around, flinging the football, I think they will bank on the fact that anything they do, acting aggressively, so long as they are correct, will pay off. We saw on the opposing sideline the type of coach that Andy Reid refuses to be. He refuses to step on someone's throat. He refuses to absolutely put the game away. Nick Sirianni did not do that. I think you will see a movement from Patrick Mahomes after being embarrassed to want to be aggressive on offense regardless. We saw the Kansas City Chiefs win a record number of single possession football games. I don't think Patrick Mahomes wants to operate in that fashion anymore. He spoke coming into the season about how football wasn't fun. Winning championships is. The aggression from the Kansas City Chiefs on offense in the coming season, I think, will be a step up. I think that's all I have for this game. I appreciate you being here. I will see you tomorrow.